Welcome to another OpenChain monthly meeting for the specification and education work groups. This is a bit of a review meeting. We're going to be talking about um, the future of this call, how we can make it more useful for people. Before we get started, I want to show the antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every call. You will find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. The agenda today is pretty straightforward. We have a little bit of news from our specification and education work groups. Then we're going to have an open discussion on how to make this call useful for people moving forward, what improvements we can make, and then we'll open the floor for any other business. When it comes to our news items, the first part is about the specification work group. In the case of the specification, this is really a reflections and lessons learned month. We've completed our freeze period for proposed updates to our ISO standards, and we are going to wait for the steering committee to formally provide comments on June 25th. Therefore, we've completed current work and we are at a point where we can look at lessons learned. Our chair, Chris Wood, is not on this call because the timing is not suitable for North America. He's based in Texas. But we had a North America and Europe call about a week ago, and he provided some reflections, some lessons learned from the process of updating and proposing updates to our ISO standards, and from our process of developing the security standard in the 2021 to 2023 period. I'll quickly give you his reflections or a summary of them. Number one, Chris noted that we have had a pretty open process, and that's good. However, our editing process largely happens on calls, and time zones remain a challenge. For the specification development, we often had quite a few people on the North America and Europe calls, and fewer people on the North America, Asia, or Europe, Asia calls. Chris was concerned that this meant that not everyone was actively contributing to development in the standards, and we could improve that. The question of how to improve it is something we'll talk about on this call a little later. The second thing Chris highlighted was that our approach, high-level process management, appears to be working well. Our license standard, the sister security standard, and if we make more standards in the future, all of these seem to benefit from our approach. Chris did mention that looking at the future, he felt that many people were talking about some really interesting things around the open source community. Things like improving SBOM quality. We're doing that in OpenChain, and that will be something you'll see a lot more of. Or talking about AI compliance. Again, we're doing that in OpenChain, and other projects are doing that elsewhere. Chris just highlighted, because there's many people working on different topics and sometimes the same topic, coordinating activities, preventing duplication, that's a future challenge to think about. We've been quite lucky in that what we have worked on has been relatively unique. But in the future, what we might be working on may be similar to other people, and that coordination is a challenge. For things that can help other projects, basically we've published all of our processes on the website. We've done all of our development on GitHub in recent years. we have recorded all of our calls. And while people might not always be able to make our calls, and people might prefer to edit standards on our calls, we do have mailing lists for the specification and the community as a whole, as well as other work groups, so people can communicate outside of time zones. Those mailing lists have public archives. So everything we've done is available to everyone to review. And for projects who want to follow the same path as us, they can check out our processes. And of course, Joint Development Foundation has published ways for projects to develop standards. They've provided toolkits and they provide direct support. So anyway, the lessons learned are that people mostly like making standards on calls or meetings face to face. Time zones are a challenge. And when it comes to the future, many people are working on exciting topics like AI, so coordination will be very important. Now, on the education work group, um, quite a lot has been happening. Now, I see Andrew Katz, our chair of education, is on the call, so I won't speak over Andrew, but the summary is our reference library is updated, new open source policy template, a new adoption guide is being worked on, and discussions are just starting about updating our training courses online. Andrew, would you like to say something about this activity?
Hi Shane, sorry, can you hear me okay? I had a slight
Yes.
technical issue. Yeah,
Hello.
fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you very much for the summary. I think that covers it. There's plenty of material has gone onto the website now. We've been sort of working very hard. And I think there's quite a lot of the activities have sort of reached a natural pause. So for example, the work that we've done on the OpenChain open source policy template. So I've had a lot of great suggestions on improving that, and indeed I've sort of had some further suggestions as well. But we've iterated that. We have a new version up on the website, which is great. And Shane, I'd also like to say that I think the reorganization of the GitHub repo is great. It really makes life an awful lot easier for people to be able to access things. And I've already had some positive comments from people who are just finding it a lot easier to navigate. I think for many people, the previous structure was a significant barrier to be able to access and use, the great resources that we've got there. So that's a huge improvement. So sort of plenty of kudos to you on that one. And then obviously we have the deployment guide as well, and that is currently open for discussion. I think you've done a sort of great job in sort of providing an early draft of that, and I think it's exactly the sort of resource that we need. So plenty of activity going on. Really, what we need to open up the discussion to is to determine where we want our focus to be going forwards. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Andrew. I did have one slight question. I think the maturity model is after having quite a positive impact. That came out, I think, last year.
Mhm.
And one thing that came up was a few ideas seem to have been percolating about that. One was to potentially include metrics. For instance, Chaos Project has metrics about health, and to
Yes.
potentially include companies using metrics as they get more advanced to double check the third party open source is coming from a healthy place. It looks like it'll be sustainable. Do you think that updating the policy template the maturity model is something we might be working on in the second half of this year?
Absolutely. And as you know, we had an open chain event in London yesterday, which was well attended, and we were talking about the maturity model as part of that. So we got a lot of positive feedback from the delegates there. Um, I think as with all open chain documentation, it's always amenable to a process of continuous improvement. But I agree very much on the focus on the metrics, because of course there are two ways in which the metrics are potentially very useful. First of all, you can use that internally with an organization to benchmark yourself um, against within different divisions within that organization. But then you can also use it as a way of both creating a roadmap and tracking your progress against that roadmap as time goes on. Now, the idea of being able to come up with a mechanism by which we can, first of all, track the community, the open chain community as a whole, and see how they're doing is fantastic. And I think this is the sort of stuff that the Chaos Project is very, very good at. So one of the initial conversations that we've had with them is the idea of coming up with a mechanism that people can, anonymously provide information about their capability, and then this can be aggregated, and then over time we can look at this aggregated data and see how participants in the open chain project themselves are moving forward and are developing. So a lot of interesting ideas there. I think that clearly collaboration between other projects is something that we're extremely keen on doing. As you say, the Chaos Project has done some really good and interesting work in this area. So this is a conversation that we definitely want to continue with, and hopefully we'll start seeing some sort of practical fruit arising from that.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And for those who aren't familiar with some of the really interesting stuff that's been going on lately, just pulling it up, here's the reference library redone. And basically, when people go to the first part of it, just open up the reference library. The README now is very comprehensively explaining what's in all the various folders. And the folders have been very much revised to make it more logical to find things as people go. So lots of explanation, better format and whatnot. And something that's coming probably tomorrow, Japan time, is a completely reorganized resources page for the project, which will be much easier to look at and to use to see how to get various things. This screenshot, this thing I'm showing you right now, is the page under editing, so the formatting is not done. But long story short, when people come to the resources page, it'll be a lot easier to understand and then begin to access the reference library. And that will be another step, hopefully, towards making things easier to use. Right. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. The thing I wanted to do on this call was to open a discussion about how to make this call and other main open chain calls more useful. We have a bunch of work groups. So Open Chain Project has got work groups that are local, work groups that are focused on industries, work groups that are focused on topics. So I'll just very briefly show you all what I mean. Like this. We have our main work groups in specification and education. We have tooling, AI, SBOM, automotive, telco, and regional groups, for instance, in Japan and Korea. That has meant that our community is on various different calls at various different times and is a bit fragmented. So I wanted to think about how do we make these central calls focused on specification and education as useful as possible, because while we've done a lot of spec editing and now it's a quiet period, and we've done a lot of education work and now it's a quiet period, I don't want these calls to be dead. I'd like to make sure that these central points to our project remain a place that people come to collaborate. We do have more work to do on things like education. So my question is, how do we make these calls, these monthly calls for specification and education, more interesting and engaging for the community? Is there stuff we need to adjust, remove, add, etc.? For example, should we include more of the work groups in this call? Should they be basing their activities on this call? Or should we split the call and have specification and education on separate calls? Should we have technical presentations? For example, when we have this monthly call, should we have a 10 or 15-minute presentation from someone about something interesting in our area? And should we adjust the schedule? I'll pause here to check if people have any comments. I saw one or two people unmute themselves briefly. So if you have something to say, please do jump in. And if you're feeling shy, I'll just open with the first major question. Should we ask more work groups to either use this call for their work or do a presentation on this call about current activities? What do you think? Just bear in mind that I can't unilaterally change the call. I do need your feedback on some direction. And it's, it's very much open that we keep the call as it is. We add or subtract other work group activity. But it would be super useful if you'd let me know your personal preference on that matter.
And I guess I can see some benefit of having like one slide per working group or something like that, just so that I can join one call and know what's going on and know which ones to be interested in and which ones not. But probably not more than that.
Right. So maybe, a case of SBOM study group, please give us a short overview of where you're at and why, etc.
Yeah, it could be one slide. Yeah, we're working on this. Release X will be planned to be next month or whatever. Just, I think, fairly simple. Just give an idea of what people, what's going on in each working group at a high level. Thoughts?
That's a very good point. And time zones might bring one work group in or one work group out, depending on where the chair is based. But we can certainly begin to bring people together. Andrew had a comment in the chat. He said he'd like to have a training session on how to use GitHub in practice, especially for text. That's a good point. I was revising our reference resources page today, and I was including links to GitHub. And I was a little bit worried about what happens when we send a manager or a lawyer to pick up a document and suddenly they're dropped into GitHub. And I think that's something we should address. Kubota-san had a comment that the study groups and work groups seem to be working well as they are, but it would be nice to have a forum to gather and share information once a month or every quarter. Maybe that's what this call should be. I mean, our existing standards are fairly well developed, and we do have work to do on education. But it looks like we do have room to put updates into this call. Now, for example, to ask our work groups to give us a slide, just like Martin said, of what they're doing. And if possible, for the chair or another person from the work group to briefly talk to the slide. If we look at the community online, here we are. Let's say the biggest work groups and study groups, tooling, AI, SBOM, if they each dropped in to give us some information, that would be perhaps up to 15 minutes, which would leave us up to 45 minutes for working on things like education material. And naturally, if we suddenly were building a new standard, we could adjust the schedule to make plenty of time for that. When it comes to a technical training session, like Andrew suggested, we can probably do that inside a similar time span. For example, 15 minutes might be enough to give people a starting understanding of how to use GitHub, particularly because it's recorded and they can go back. Okay, pulling together the feedback so far, here's what I have, and please let me know if I'm wrong. We will have updates from study groups or work groups. We will have key technical presentations like how to use GitHub. So stuff that's useful for everyone. And finally, the last question, is the schedule for this call okay for you as someone based in Europe or in Asia? So is this timing okay for you, or do you think we need to change it? If no one has specific feedback, I'll assume the schedule is okay. But if people do have specific feedback, I'm very open. Okay, Martin said it's okay for him in the UK. Fine in India. By the way, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Vaishali, for confirming this. India was worrying me a little because I really want to include India more and more in our conversation. So that's important. I see we have people from Korea, China, and Japan on the call, so I'm assuming it's okay. Hi, Gary. By the way, Gary did a really great contribution to the policy template. He's based in the UK. He was just confirming that timing's okay with him. All right. Schedule is okay. At the moment, then, I'm putting down schedule is okay. Kubota-san says he's available after working hours. Kubota-san works about 18 hours a day, so he's a very hard worker. Florian, I think you're based in Germany. You confirmed schedule's okay for you. Okay, so basically then updates from subgroups or working groups, one slide, 5 minutes max. Technical presentations using our stuff. So important presentations about using our things. One last
And
question. Oh, sorry.
sorry, Shane. Yeah, I was going to say that also provides an opportunity for perhaps a slightly deeper dive from something from one of the work groups. Like they've got, a document in that's about to be released, they want extra eyes on or something like that. So I think
Yes.
that works as well for, yeah.
We actually have exactly that situation, Martin, coming up. I'm going to pull up an example. The AI study group, or work group, my apologies, it converted to a work group a little while ago. The AI work group is nearly ready to release a guide, and they're bringing it to the board. And this is the Artificial Intelligence System Bill of Materials Compliance Management Guide. Long story short, I just put the link in the chat. Long story short, a lot of people are talking about AI. Some people have made AI bill of materials. Less people have described how to manage this stuff in the supply chain. So they've built a guide based on our existing type of approach. They looked at ISO 5230, our compliance standard, and they looked at other standards in areas like AI. For example, they looked at 42001, which is a detailed standard about AI management. They looked at 5962, which is SPDX for SBOM. and they started to create this guide, which basically outlines how a company can do things. What do they need? Policy, competence, etc., etc. So basically, to Martin's point, we do have a situation where big news, help wanted, it can be displayed usefully on our calls. Right. One last question. Do you want presentations from other people doing cool stuff? Normally, we put other presentations in our webinars. For example, if SPDX is doing something, we say, let's do a webinar. You can have up to 1 hour to talk about this. We've done that with To-Do Group. We've done that with companies. We've done that with our own material for deep dive. But would you like short guest presentations on these calls about key things? For example, let's just pick up the recent work we've seen around OpenSSF. So OpenSSF has recently been doing some pretty interesting stuff around looking at how security works in open source. They've been looking at how we can support security with things like what they call the security baseline. And we can do a big webinar with them. But we could also say to someone, hey, how about you join our call 5 minutes, give us the big picture. Andrew said he's interested in that, which I suppose, the short thing could be a leading into a longer webinar. Do other people have an interest? Florian says interested, particularly between standards and technical implementation. Yep. Maybe tasters or webinars. So very quick presentations, let us know the big points, and then maybe we have the webinars to deep dive. Wow, Florian's comment had 3 thumbs up. So it seems the intersection between the standard and technical implementation, people want more of that. Okay. The feedback is heard. So this is what I've got. Schedule is okay. Updates from subgroups or working groups, short, 1 slide, especially things like big news and help wanted. We should have presentations on key things like how to use GitHub, where we store our reference material, and maybe external news implementation. And that can lead into our webinar series. Great. Does anyone else have anything to add on this topic? Right. If not, our usual pause. Is there any other business that you would like to cover today? All right. If there's no other business, we'll end this meeting at the 30-minute mark. I want to say thank you very much. It's very useful to have this feedback on how to make these calls more useful, and I will implement this in June. We will start from next month. With that, thank you and see you next time. Have a good day. Take care all.